So I thought I might start with this. It's one of my favorite Einstein quotes. I'm sure many of you have your own, be that tied to the classic and oft used around definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, or if you can't explain something simply, you candidly don't know it well enough. But I think this one is deeply apropos to this moment in time that we sit in. And when we think about the need to revisit and to revamp and retool the nature of how we approach purpose-driven organizations and our purpose-driven leadership programs, this quote really rings true for me. Now, I'm not trying to posit that Einstein back in the early 30s, as the most well-renowned theoretical physicist, was pontificating about the challenges of COVID and leadership and purpose in 2020 when he made this statement, but I do think it applies. And for those of you that are perhaps kind of caught up or questioning the nature of, do we need to fundamentally revisit our thinking in terms of how we approach this subject, it's not just about a feel-good effort. It's about driving some really critical business results. And when I think about some of the recent research done by Ernst & Young and Conference Board that concluded early this year, talking about purpose-driven organizations, and you're going to hear from one of them first and foremost today, outperforming the stock market by 42%, that's a business impact driver. When I think about purpose-driven organizations racking up double-digit uptick in engagement relative to their peers, that's a business metric. When I think about the nature of retention, upwards of 14% in terms of percentage points, typically by purpose-driven organizations and how they're able to keep and attract the best talent, or customer loyalty up in the 80% mark for those organizations, it's not a fad. It's not something you should be taking lightly. So I challenge you all throughout today to rethink how you're approaching this subject, because it is deeply important. So from my soapbox, I shall step off, and let's talk a little bit about how we want to spend our time together today. There's some additional research by our good friends at Brandon Hall that I'd love to be able to take you all through, because I think it's rather salient to the entire message and the theme of this session. And really the bulk of this part of the entire time today is really spent on hearing from one of your peers, an expert in the space, both from a strategy, from a design, from a deployment standpoint, who has brought this to her organizations in CEMEX, one of the leading, if not the leading, players in this in the building material space for over 100 years. So talk about rethinking and driving with purpose-driven leadership. She has done that and then some. So an opportunity for you to hear a little bit from her, and then I think we'll try to make this a conversation. I think what works so well about the CLO Symposium format is this opportunity for us to have dialogue with one another. And even though I'm confined into an office with what seems like an ever-growing checklist of not accomplished tasks, it's nice for us to have some dialogue with one another. So let me start with a poll on this note. And as Jessica publishes out to folks, I want you all to take a look at your own organizations and answer on behalf of those orgs. So when you think about, do you believe your organization develops in the supports and promotes, again, check any or all that apply. And this first poll, we can just start with answering the first one. No need to do the second just now. Really, the reason why I'm teeing this one up to start is this was the basis of the impact of leadership development study completed by Brandon Hall at the outset of this year. And I think it becomes rather critical in terms of setting the tone and where do you believe you fall? And I think we'll give folks a little bit of a chance to sort of fire in their responses on this, and we can publish those results back out in just a minute. But then I'd like to take you through some of that research not in its entirety. We're going to share an ebook with you at the end here where you have a chance to really sort of in an exhaustive manner step through that, but it's some pretty telling responses to some of these. So Jessica, let me know when you feel like we've got a critical mass and we can publish that back out for folks.
Yeah, I'll keep it open for about 10 seconds or so. My apologies for launching the second poll. I am a little bit new to Zoom webinar and did not let me choose the first one, so I apologize for that.
We're being agile. We're giving you a sneak peek at what is the second poll to come later, but that's for the close.
So thank you everyone for responding. I will go ahead and close it now and just share the results. Let's first focus on the first question here.
Okay, perfect. Interesting. Wow, that's very intriguing. So I think when we look at the nature of this is going to be really applicable to the 650 or 450 some odd respondents in the Brandon Hall study in terms of how you all have scored this. Certainly leading out with the 70% mark at Leaders Who Empower collaboration. That's a really critical one. I think that's kind of fascinating, and it's interesting. Right at the 50% mark in terms of taking responsibility for driving engagement, that's a big one. So let me close this for a second, and let me show and share with you how others in this actual study responded, because I think it's rather telling. So the way that Brandon Hall kind of broke out this research, and I'll fly out these animations for your benefit, is thinking about others versus hypos. And hypos, think of them as, again, the high performing organizations, and the determinant of said hypo really is year over year outperforming in 6 critical areas tied to distinct KPIs. And those range from revenue to growth to retention to customer satisfaction. It's a whole series of variables, but I thought it was rather, your responses collectively were rather on point. And I think the big takeaway from all of this across these 3 variables is look at the delta between those hypos in terms of where they put their emphasis and where they believe they're performing. So if you scored near those marks, I think you're heading in the right direction. The second piece that I want to share, less about others versus hypo, but more about this absolute question. And it was a combination question that Brandon Hall posed around belief in current leaders as a group, holistically, having both the competencies and the emotional intelligence to really drive their organization's business goals. And they gave it a 1 to 2 year outlook. So you've got, I think in a wonderful way, some 59% saying yes to that, but it's a bit alarming in my estimation that some 40% of those respondents are saying no to that. And maybe I can give you the next level of color and details as to why not. When you think about, and I think maybe many of you are struggling with this idea of succession management, that's a challenging one. And I think it speaks to, and you're going to hear in the CEMEX story here in a little bit from Claudia about this purposeful approach to addressing leadership at all levels of the organization so that you can account for some of those challenges in, say, succession planning. And I'm just realizing now I didn't publish it in this next slide, but some of you might be thinking in terms of from the researchers amongst the group, why did you potentially conflate by adding 2 variables in the same question, competencies and emotional intelligence? Are those not at odds with one another? So there was a follow-up question done in the study that asked hypos and other organizations, which do they value more? Which do they believe to be of greater importance? And I thought it was fascinating. I can verbally just tell you, hypos ranked emotional intelligence 60% importance versus skills and competencies at 40. The others, the non-high performing organizations, absolute invert. 40% of those organizations put the greater degree of emphasis or put emphasis on emotional intelligence versus competencies and skills. So I think the idea that this COVID no one saw coming, but the opportunity to think about building out EQ across the organization for whatever might come is rather important, rather telling. And then the last 2 that I wanted to share here is you may be asking yourselves, what are leaders doing? How are they attempting to sort of drive this business impact? And you'll hear it directly on the CEMEX side of the house, but so much of this, right, is this universal holistic approach around all levels of the org. That becomes important, not just in the populations you're touching, but I think the research says also about the models that you're deploying. Don't just think about that top tier of leaders. Don't just think about first-time managers or folks that have moved from individual contributor into that role. It needs to be sort of universal across the board. And then certainly with something like high touch and the application to just basically to share the skill set, the coaching and mentoring, and having a capability to basically share that out is really, really important for your organizations. So the last piece that I wanted to share here, let me pull you forward. This was a additional study done, an ongoing research by Brandon Hall that just wrapped up in June of this year that talks about in this era that we are all wrestling through in terms of COVID, what are those definitive behaviors, right? Because at the end of the day, leadership is not just about a party line or a spoken word, it's about demonstrable behaviors. So what are people doing that really sort of demonstrate the nature of inclusive leadership that really speaks to that purpose-driven nature? So I think of obviously the caring and well-being, and even those top 5, I look at this are become so important. So if you're wondering, what should the outcomes of your programs be and where should their emphasis and focus be? If you're doing it right, I think many of them sort of hit on this list that you see on the screen now. So with that said, I think this is what I would like to do. Is really the bulk of this time is spent, and the value is not listening to me as the chief learning strategist at NovoEd, but hearing from someone who's been there, who's walked a mile in their shoes, who's taken a strategic lens, a design lens, and the nature of a deployment lens about how can you bring this concept of purpose-driven leadership to bear at her organization. And I think she's done just an absolute incredible job with it. So please join me in welcoming Claudia de la Torre to the dialogue as we sit in a fireside chat. Claudia, welcome.
Hello, Todd. Thank you so much.
You know what I'm realizing? I feel like we nearly hit the trifecta of visuals in a PowerPoint. We had an Einstein quote. We have a Yule log. I think we're just missing a Venn diagram. Had we had that, I think we would have knocked it out of the park, but we'll go with this to start. So Claudia, maybe for the benefit of folks that don't know CEMEX and its expansive 100-year history in the space, can you share maybe a little bit about just the firm as a whole and sort of your organization and kind of your role there?
I would love to, if we could. Thank you. Well, CEMEX started doing business more than 100 years ago and has grown from being a local player to one of the top global companies in the industry. We have operations in the Americas, in the Caribbean, in Europe, in Africa, Middle East, and Asia. Our operation produces, distributes, and markets cement, ready-mix concrete, aggregates, and related building materials, services, and solutions. We actually tailor our products and services to suit our customer needs. We are a very customer-centric company. And so everything that we do, we try to modify to make sure that we meet our clients, our customers' needs, from home construction, improvement, renovation, etc., to all kind of applications. I would like to go to the next one, Todd.
Of course.
Thank you. And just to share a bit about us, I would like to share that we have a very clear value creation model where what we do, it means our mission, our purpose, and values are aligned to how we do it through our strategic pillars, to our governance model, etc. And we are aligned also on how we create value for each of our stakeholders. At the end, the whole organization is aligned to create sustainable value by providing industry-leading products and solutions to satisfy the needs of our customers around the world. And I think, and jump in, Todd, if you have any question, but as we have learned and growth in the organization, we really recognize how our people are the ones that are unlocking the company's value. So we intend that in all of our leadership development programs, we clearly articulate how our leadership is playing a key role contributing to our purpose. And we would like to share today and talk about a bit of Connect, one of our leadership development programs, because at the end, our purpose guides everything we do, from hiring to learning to development, and help us, well, drive the organization and to serve not only our employees, but to customers and the communities in which we work.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And so many other folks may be pursuing this idea of, you think of the PDL model, the purpose-driven leadership. I think it's got 3 hallmarks, right? That you clearly have stated that sort of the core tenets, right? It's about just discovering your personal purpose, helping each and every employee do that. Helping others find their purpose on your respective teams, whether you're a C-suite or a team lead, or you're running a business unit or a division. And then I think the last piece that I think you have done so well, that so many organizations often miss, is what's that connective tissue back to the organization? What's the sort of real world application? So Claude, do you want to share maybe just the broad strokes? I know we're going to talk and I'll reference Connect as the sort of hallmark program that you have put forth, but maybe share just a sort of a few words at a high level for folks to get grounded in sort of what this effort and initiative was when we talk about purpose-driven leadership at CEMEX.
Yes, of course. We're really happy with Connect. Connect is a leadership development program that is targeting the people that are transitioning to first-time managers. And we're focusing on managers as part of our central node of creating, well, of course, driving a cultural change, but driving the employee experience for their own team. We have studies that support that the experience of an employee is not really the whole company, right? They actually feel that the whole experience of the company is whatever they live with their own supervisor. So that was why we felt it's really important to focus on them, to start creating the same connecting tissue, the same principles, the same values, practices, tools, etc., that we could leverage everywhere, and just take into consideration our footprint. We are a very global company, and we really thought that this was a way to start creating one CEMEX, a one CEMEX feeling that it's sharing behaviors all over the world with those managers. So these are the three of the main objectives: building connections among our teams, creating trust, creating trust and engagement, connecting with CEMEX strategy. We really want them to have a clear understanding of their purpose. And of course, creating networks and connections across the organization, because these are global cohorts. So they meet managers all over the world so they can connect and relate to each other as well.
Yeah, and I think for so many of the folks that are on the on the line on the Zoom with us today, that sense of scale I think becomes important, right? It's not just this isolated program and a single business unit and a single geo, but having to sort of accommodate the needs, across the entire global footprint. I think is important. Can we go a little bit deeper, Claudia, if you'll allow me to pester you with a series of questions around sort of the driving why for this?
I would be glad to.
I think glad to is maybe overstatement, but you're being a good sport about it. So
No, I'm very happy to do that.
So I think of it like this, and the story that you've told to date, and I think of sort of the visual image here around context. It's so much, I think, around the CEMEX program was born around this focus on alignment. And I think for folks that are doing this and the Brandon Hall research, that alignment word becomes so important. Can you talk maybe a little bit around sort of what, in the context of that, what led to sort of the birth of the Connect program and this sort of recognition that you have to tie it back to kind of day-to-day work, maybe share a little bit of that for the benefit of the audience.
Yes, of course. Well, as we were sharing just a moment ago, we really feel that these leadership development programs are really focused on enabling transitions. This is the case of Connect, focusing on the people that are making an effective transition from individual contributors to managers of others. We think that they are key creating the employee experience for their team, and making sure that they could share that experience, and that they creating the same employee experience worldwide. So we want them to share the same mindset, practices, and aspiration. And this is a great way to start creating these same concepts all over the world. When we designed this, we were really thinking, just to give you an example, on we were very thoughtful of what is the reality of those employees that are transitioning. And one of the things that they need to be very clear is what I need to do to be successful on my role, but also what does CEMEX needs me to do. So I'm an ambassador as well for CEMEX, so I need to really have very clear understanding at different levels, and maybe we can speak in a moment about our leadership development model, which actually was taken to build this program. And this was kind of a mindset that would evolve and that would make the whole experience a cohesive and an integrated experience. May I jump into that? Todd?
Yes, please. No, I think that would be great because so much of that core tenet of the purpose-driven organization, I think, feeds from the model, and folks that
Yeah.
are doing that, the high pos that are doing that right, like you all have a model that addresses all parts of the org. So please dive in.
Yes, our model is formed by concentric circles, starting with the center, having the manager having and reflecting on their own purpose and how they need to be a leader and what they are gonna make a difference and how they can actually be transcendent and make an impact to their team. So we start with a reflection of our own behavior, skills, but also where do we want to take our teams? And we have a very clear discussion on where to take them. And then the second part, or the second concentric circle, is focusing on my own team. So then you start creating connections with your team and understanding them, not in the traditional way, but trying to think on being or becoming an orchestra director instead of a supervisor, but making the best of everyone's voice and everyone's strengths, not to make sure that we share the same strengths, but we leverage the opportunities of one supporting with the strengths of another one to make sure that at the end we have a beautiful symphonic music, right? And then we move to a next level. The next level in the concentric circle would be connecting at CEMEX. And connecting at CEMEX would be trying to break the silo thinking, trying to understand the business and the whole business as your business, so everyone can have a clear understanding of CEMEX metrics, CEMEX results, and they can link them easily to their own results, because that is the way that you will create that alignment with your own team as well. And finally, we create a final circle where we try to break the boundaries of CEMEX, connecting with the ecosystem and making sure that we create value to our stakeholders within our communities, but also with our suppliers, with our customers, of course, and every level. So we create and think not only how we can do our own job better, but how we can create value for the company and for the community as well.
Yeah, I think that, and maybe this sort of aligns with my sort of follow up to that, Claudia's around. I know you made a really purposeful choice, right, in picking, and I think the byline of Connect is right as managers, as as the primary node to deliver culture, which makes me think a lot about. For folks that are familiar with Kurt Kaufman's work, and former Gallup researcher, and First Break All the Rules, he authored, as well as his more recent publication around Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast, and how important the cultural element is to really sort of driving the company. Did that evolve over time, or was that something that you just looked at those transitionary moments and said, this is the sweet spot for CEMEX, we must start here? What are your thoughts on sort of selecting that audience?
No, we actually were very clear on that audience. Let me tell you that we designed for them. Each of our leadership development programs is focusing on a different transition, because we really think that our leadership development programs will really enable those leaders to make an effective transition at that point. Specifically talking about Connect, what really happened is that this is a very, well, you can only attend by invitation. So it starts creating a buzz of what's happening there. I want to be part of that, etc. So when you do that, then other people that might be at the verge of that transition might be benefit as well. They can participate as well, and they can be benefit and enjoy the program and start spreading the knowledge, the behaviors, the practices, etc. But when we design, we're very like how can I tell that? Explain myself, just to be very pure on the conceptual directions. So we design for a specific group, even though that the program is being used broadly to other audiences as well.
Yeah, I think that it harkens back to the sort of know your audience, right, and design for your audience in a really specific way. I'm curious to, as we continue on with our dialogue, I'd love to hear what folks are thinking maybe in the Q&A or the chat. Is that idea of, at some points, maybe controversial, the idea of creating this exclusive program, when in essence you're trying to edify and educate and uplift the entire org. Why would you make it exclusive? I think you had a really purposeful decision as to why you did that at CEMEX. I'd love to hear what other people think and reactions in chat as we go along. But can we shift a little bit, or maybe one last question on kind of on the why side? I think there were two kind of big hallmarks that were deeply important for you with the Connect program. One was speed to market. How quickly can you get this out to meet the needs of these sort of first-time managers and those transition moments? And the second, I think, was around scale, thinking about the number of cohorts and individuals in each cohort you're putting through. Can you talk a little bit about why those were sort of two big defining factors and of critical importance to you out of the gates at CEMEX?
Yes, of course. I have already shared first about how's our footprint. So that makes our target audience very dispersed over different geographical locations all over the world. So they are not concentrated on a big city or somewhere that you could just bring people together when we could, previous to coronavirus.
Right, pre-COVID.
Yeah, so actually, when we were evaluating the needs of this program, we had a first attempt of running the program face-to-face. That when we evaluated that, we found out that implied a huge effort and tons of time, and I cannot even tell you the investment, because at
I
the
won't
end,
ask you that, I promise.
yeah, at the end, whenever, don't matter the kind of program that we design, it actually has to be based on basic design principles, and I'll explain about that in a bit. But we learned that it was not possible to have that face-to-face program, that that approach wouldn't work to make sure that we provide the same experience with the international components and leaders participating. So we decided to build something leveraging technology. So we invited NovoEd to participate. Our HR head was also very concerned about our speed to market. So we decided to leverage two great thought partners, Deloitte and Harvard. And finally, after having implemented Connect one or two times, we decided to add a continuous learning pathway. So we created an extended learning path that they could access in the grid. So when you think in the whole program, and I really would like you to invite you to think and be very careful on the partners that you invite. You have to make sure that, for example, in terms of the technology, you could bring the components that we really need to make sure that the experience for these leaders was not only impactful, but they would be able to bring, and I'll address my learning principles, my design principles. So we had to have leaders as teachers. So we had to have very senior leaders at the organization worldwide sharing their own experience, explaining concepts, meeting and joining the cohort. So we would have to have them. And then we would need them to interact with each of the cohorts. So we needed the technology to support with that, and make sure that they could actually bring the learning to their own work and apply it. So we had to have, we call them missions at the end of each model, but they need to bring them to their own situation and make the reflection on how to really use it and apply all the learnings. That, and of course, having internal and external thought leaders are our three design principles that were also very linked to these scale and speed to market decisions.
Oh, that's intriguing. And maybe we'll pull the thread on the sort of the design principles as we sort of transition into a bit of the focused what. So you were very purposeful in the audience. That transitionary moment for these first-time managers, making that kind of an exclusive program, I think, are all wonderful takeaways for folks on the line. I thought there was another design principle, which maybe you can share a little bit more about teachers as leaders, because it's that term has been used before, and I've heard it in my days at Schneider Electric. We use that term, but nowhere near the level of contribution and the way that you plug those folks in, I think, is fantastic. It's not just a talking head for a 2-minute video, but the fact that they're part and parcel from a facilitation standpoint. I think that was a sort of one of those core foundational tenets from a design side. But are there other ones that stick out? And I thought, Claudia, you mentioned to me before a little bit around trying to put people back into that first time employee mindset. They've been at the organization for so long, but what was it like to kind of get your bearings and understand the nature of CEMEX at the outset? Was that one of the design principles you took into account in designing Connect?
Yes, let me start with the first part. I think we could break it.
Sure.
The part of leaders as teachers, those for example, when we have leaders participating in other leadership programs, and for example, in another program that is a bit more senior, then the people that graduate from that could participate and is willing to participate in other of our leadership programs to other levels of audience as leaders, as teachers, and we call them leader to leaders. And this is actually great because they think they are not only contributing to the organization, but they were so impacted by their own experience. And I have to say that's the key thing. They have to be very convinced that this is the way, because they had their own leaders as teachers as well, because we brought as well very senior leaders to teach them. So at the end, we have a group of leaders that whenever we ask, hey, we're going to launch another cohort, and we actually do that before we start every cohort. Then they said, count me in. I want to be a leader to leader. So at the end, I have to say, no, I want another distribution just to make sure that we have distributed leaders as well, not having all from Europe or from America, etc. Sorry. But also making sure that we have from all the areas, from all the experiences, with diversity, having women, so that is also curated within the selection of leaders, and we assign them a role within the program to participate in specific conversations. We have a preparation for them. So before the cohort starts, we have a session with them, we explain them, we create them facilitation materials, we enable them so they feel secure on what they are gonna do. And then we push them not only to participate in conversations, discussions, etc., but also push the thinking, make sure that the learnings of the participants are not just a general program that you understood and that's it, but that you actually brought the concepts in, that you reflected, that you made a work and an introspection, and that you're actually applying that into your work. And they are really great examples, because then they ask, how did you did that? Did you live that experience? Did you have that other problem? I know that you're located on that plant, and we know that there was a specific problem. Share about that. So it actually creates a cohesion within the group. Everyone wants to be part of the leader to leaders because they are treated as well as an elite.
Sure.
So for example,
bit of a cachet with that.
Yeah, of course. We have an alumni, and for those leader to leaders and everyone that has graduated from our leadership development programs, we create an alumni so they can enjoy of the benefits of having information prior to the rest of the organization, having access to specific programs, having contact with the specific leaders. So we continue building and growing that sense of feeling special. That I think that's the point, and sharing what you have learned and taking advantage of that. I don't know
Yeah,
if I extended too long, sorry.
no, I mean, it's fascinating to me because the 2 points that stand out, Claudia, I think, and so many maybe on the line, I'd love to hear your thoughts and in the chat on this is two things. One, this concept of what you're alluding to speaks to, that the term maybe folks heard, 5-7 years ago around work out loud, right? Make your work observable, be part and contribute back to the corporate memory of the organization. And you're doing that. You're doing that at scale with these senior leaders. And it's not something in addition to my job. My sense is the culture you've been able to create at CEMEX is it's a place that I aspire to. I would like to be thought of in that way. I have a lot to share, and you're giving them the sort of focused manner with which to do it. And the second piece that it does, whether this was purposeful or not, I think you've created that flywheel, the idea that now it becomes the sort of reinforcing, modeling behavior that others want to be in pursuit of. And if you're not pulling the thread on that, that number one question in the Brandon Hall research that people struggle with is lack of capability around succession planning. Well, guess what solves for that? What you are doing today at CEMEX, which I think is brilliant.
And I want to recognize,
yeah, please.
finally, just to recognize that we brought, for example, great thought leaders. We have Deloitte, and so when we have the program and we curated material with Harvard, we decided not just to place videos and papers one after the other, but actually creating a story and sharing how that is working for CEMEX and what are the things that we need to change on our capabilities and our behaviors, etc., to make sure that we are sharing a story and that is powerful enough to make sure that at the end people feel with not only with the commitment to implement what they have learned, but they feel engaged, motivated, and they feel that this is an inspiring program. And I think that's part of the magic as well.
I have to believe so, right? Because I think the challenge with so many emergent technologies, and I've come from this world candidly. When you think about folks that have put, say, other experience platforms or LXPs in place, there's things they can do wonderfully around aggregation and personalization. But the idea of just creating a rote playlist, even of disparate microlearning, stringing that together and hoping that changes behavior and that affects cultural influence in the organization, I think is rather far-fetched. So I love the storyline focus and driving for emotional impact, because that gets people listening and changing their behavior, which I think is really, really important. The other piece, maybe, I know some of the design elements you talked about, the leadership model. Are there any other pieces kind of on the what side before we transition maybe into some of the how? Because I think that's part of the secret sauce, to the extent that you're willing to share, that folks would be really intrigued about. But anything else, Claudia, do you think that I've missed kind of on kind of the focused what that for folks to be cognizant of or thinking of as they're revamping or retooling their own programs?
No, I think that we covered the essential. We really think that the program is doing great because it has a variety of resources as well. So we have, on one aspect, the leaders that are being recorded through videos, etc. We have a host during the program sharing what is the mindset that we need for each of the model. So she asked actually for a reflection and what is the modification on the thought and behaviors that we're asking our participants to do on that specific model. So when they reach specific tools, when they reach specific papers, etc., they can consider that initial introduction to make sure that they channel properly the learning. I don't know, we can touch a lot of the inner concepts of the program, but at the end, I think those are the general aspects.
No, that's brilliant, and maybe that leads us in sort of thoughtfully into this concept of the unified how, and you shared a few of those pieces. But if you sort of flipped it, because I know you've taken a couple of cohorts through already, and I think you've gotten some some sort of phenomenal sort of feedback that you're constantly iterating and retooling. But are there certain kind of the most compelling components of the program that really stood out to those learners that you say, we absolutely hit the mark with the combination of our thought leaders and the platform that really spoke to executing on Connect, that stand out, Claudia?
Yes, well, let me tell you that we are running a couple of cohorts per year. The size of our cohorts is between 100 to 200 participants. And we try to have it as diverse as possible. So we have people from all the locations, all the geographical areas, functions, etc., to make sure that we have a place where we could learn from each other as well. And the program, because I read on the comments, is 9 weeks long. So we actually give them 10 just to make sure that we close everything on the program. But we have implemented some of the some components as we have been evolving. For example, we have now a kickoff webinar and a closing webinar. On this cohort, we are having a mid section because this is a big cohort and we really want to make sure that they feel that they are advancing and having progress together. But they do have discussions with leaders, missions. They put into practice what they are learning through homeworks, practices, surveys, etc. They get to know people around the world, the globe, and they learn from each other as they share experiences. They the content has been curated as I was sharing to tell a story in each of the models, to link concepts and make sure that everyone has a reflection and a way to go deeper into concepts. So at the end, they have tons of other resources that they could go and learn from if they are willing or they have the need to continue learning more. But at least they have the basic that will enable them to have that and share the same mindset and experience for their for themselves as managers, but for their teams as well. So at, at the end, what they know is what CEMEX needs to adopt and how CEMEX needs to shape and continue learning and continue innovating. And so those concepts are embedded through the program to make sure that those are really, really valued by our employees. As I was, as you were telling a moment ago, we're learning as we go. We have already like 6 or 7 cohorts. It's almost 3 years with the program. But we have great responses. We have, of course, a survey at the end of the program. We have a NPS, very high of 72 or 70 something, very high for the standards of our programs. And they are really sharing that the program is impacting them in a personal way. And I think that's the most valuable thing, because we, of course, try to measure if the content is okay, if it's relevant. We measure, we are actually measuring every year and comparing with our workforce experience survey and comparing this group against their colleagues. So we find them more engaged, with a higher commitment to their teams, valuing more what CEMEX is doing for them, and willing to bring that experience to their team. So at the end, I think it's a great circle.
Yeah, Claudia, I love that. You're already thinking, and as the cohorts that have gone through, and as you evolve in the further iterations, which might be my next question here around the future for the Connect program and CEMEX as a whole. But the fact that you're not just looking at learning for learning's sake, and yes, the NPS scores are important, but trying to isolate out and drive at those business metrics that we opened with, and thinking about a sort of a new way of thinking, because I think all of us in this space, right, and are in pursuit of that holy grail of being able to be in a demonstrable fashion, not just loose corollary, but be able to say, listen, this program had a definitive demonstrable effect on our organization, and being able to prove that out. So I love that you're heading in that direction. Can I, and maybe this wasn't clear to folks, but I think what was other brilliant about what you did with the program as a whole, it's all digital. correct
Yes.
in that statement? So what insights or words of wisdom might you have for your fellow leaders that are in the midst of grappling with this daunting challenge of taking an exhaustive high touch program like Connect, like a leadership development program, and putting that in a purely digital world? Any 2 or 3 sort of critical things to think about or pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, well, I really think that we were, for example, playing with the size of our cohorts. As you can imagine, just to make sure that you track and that you feel and you give a personal response to every employee, takes a lot of work. But when you're supported by other 10 leaders in the organization, then suddenly it's not that much of a work, right? If you assign the correct time to do that and make sure that the interactions are really impactful, then it actually makes sense to have them as big as possible. We are having this size of cohorts allow us to enjoy the international and the variety of our cultures, because we really need to make sure that the experience of someone, and I'm gonna just share an example, in Egypt, can feel connected with what another manager is feeling in Philippines or in Mexico or in the US. Or so when we have these big cohorts, we can share that experiences, because when you have small cohorts, then you depend on how open and vocal these leaders and participants are, right? To make sure that you actually connect. But when you have huge cohorts, such as this one, you can connect people. For example, we start always introducing ourselves and saying a fun fact about us. And when I start connecting people saying, your hobby is, for example, biking, we have, please connect with A, B, C, and D who are also bikers. Or you are a sailor, we have other sailors, and you like to cook, share recipes with 1, 2, and 3. So they can start having connections with people all over the world, first and in an informal manner, and then on a more business-like environment with experiences that are really, really really matter to them.
So Claudia, I know that you've been really thoughtful about weaving in some of the commentary, and I've been trying to pop that up as I'm displaying as well. But Jessica, can I turn to you to see? I want to certainly invite other opportunities for folks that may have fired in questions that we didn't catch in the midst of scrolling the chat function there, that we want to sort of post the group. I think we've got about 10 minutes left before time is up here.
Yeah, and I just want to say the chat has been remarkable. I love the conversation that's going on alongside this, and I was just kind of writing down some of the questions that came up. And there's some good ones on here. So thank you everyone for being engaged, and obviously please feel free to ask some questions, as we will take this remaining time to kind of just address any questions that the audience has. So one of the questions that I saw come up a couple of times was around measuring success. So Claudia, can you kind of talk about how you measure the success of this program?
Yes, of course, Jesse. Of course, I already shared that we had at the end a very basic survey to find how is the employee satisfaction. We measure the program NPS, how they are recommending the program to other leaders. But at the end, and as I also shared, what we are testing around our workforce experience survey, finding how this cohort is behaving against their and scoring against their colleagues in terms of engagement, in terms of satisfaction, in terms of evaluating their team as well. But at the end, I think that creating that pool approach, I think, is what matters the most, because when you have a program where we are trying to say, now we're closing the cohort, no more participants on this cohort, they have to wait, then it's a good program. People still find value on participating and dedicating 3 to 4 hours a week during 9 to 10 weeks, right? So it's tons of efforts, because they actually have their own work to do. and they have homeworks and missions that they have to do with their own team, so they have to involve their direct team. So I think that that proves that the program is actually working.
Great. And Claudia, as you were talking about the time commitment of 3 to 4 hours a week, there was a question that came in. You know, people's lives are obviously very busy, especially more so now. Like, how do you overcome, you know, when people are unable to attend or they think that they don't have time within their day? Do you have a lot of buy-in from the leadership team?
Well, let me start by saying that the program is a bit flexible. So they have a week or 2 weeks, depending the model, to finish that specific model. So they can allocate the time and plan ahead. It's not like surprise, today you have to participate in a couple of hours session, right? So they can plan ahead, and that gives them a bit of freedom, because sometimes they have commitments or holidays on a specific country that are not shared in another one, right? And that allows a bit of flexibility. What we have are deadlines to complete each of the models, and we actually use a NovoEd functionality. So they would, to make sure that the cohort is advancing together. So we give them 3 days and they have the welcome model, and then they have model 1 and they have week and a half, and until that Wednesday, then the content is deployed for them. So that way we know that they are advancing at the same time. And also the leader to leaders are pushing and sharing through conversations. And at the end, we follow up with our HR teams, but just to make sure that we don't have someone with a specific problem, specifically now on a pandemic, we cannot assume that everyone is safe on their home. So we try to be very, try to have empathy and try to find out if sometimes they are caregivers, or sometimes someone is sick near them, or and things happen, and specifically at this time. So we're not being as hard or as closed as we could be in other occasions. But this is working at the end.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And then, you know, actually, Laurel here in the chat brought up a very good point, is tying the course and the content back into the learning goals. And I know in the earlier on in this presentation, you talked about how CEMEX is a very purpose-driven organization. So this Connect course, based on what I know of it and what I've heard you say so far, is just very closely tied with that organizational goals that also will help, I guess, encourage more participation and get people excited about this course.
Yes, so when we start and when we give the kickoff program, we share the learning objectives. We tell them what are the behaviors that we're trying to develop and what are we expecting from each of them. And of course, we excite them about the journey. We excite them about the leaders and what they are going to experience with them. And then we just allow them to go into the platform and learn. I think it's when you have a great content, right? When you have great leaders joining that content, when you have a host, when you have internal leaders recorded that are pouring all their self into this, then it matches and people get excited as well. It's not, we're connecting with people and making sure that we're creating deep connections, not from the start point and through each of the conversations. And I think that's key to keep them engaged.
I completely agree. I know we have a couple minutes left, and I just want to take this moment to address another question that I saw come up a couple of times, and it's around the timeline of Connect and how you guys kind of built this program out. So how long did it take to launch the first cohort?
Well, to build the program, we built it in 3 to 4 months. As I was saying, we had the need of having speed to market. And that's why we leverage our thought partners. And we created first our learning model and what were the things that we were gonna need in each of the models. And then we went curating material, and then we create like the connecting tissue with our internal and senior leaders. And that's how we started building the experience. And at the end, just making sure that we had form ways to have those connections within participants, with leader to leaders, and bringing their learning to their own work, right? So it was very fast. And I must tell you that in my team, it's just one person and myself. And we actually launched, it takes a couple of weeks to launch the cohort. And I think the first weeks are very time consuming in terms of what's needed. We have people that cannot solve any question, or doesn't know how to use the platform, or I don't know, they lost how to access, etc. But once we know that everyone is settled on the welcome model, then they will go start and navigating by themselves, and we just follow up and see that the quality and the level of the conversations are at the level that we need them. And it's just making sure that the quality is there, right?
Great, thank you.
Jessica,
go ahead.
do you mind if you mind if as we take folks to close, to see if we have a chance to publish that last poll? I don't know if that got tied with the initial one, but
yeah, you totally read my mind. And okay. I will say that it seems like there's one poll but two questions, so you'll see the same polls pop up, but please just answer the second one. So I'll go ahead and relaunch that now. So if you could just focus on the second one here, that would be great. Apologies.
Or if you really didn't like your answers in the first one, I guess you could respond to that, but for the second piece. And I think really this speaks to what Claudia and Jessica and I have been chatting about is there's a lot of components that I think that go into this. So just intrigued as folks sort of turn the lens back in as we bring this full circle with revisiting your thinking for how do we sort of exit out of this. Focus on do you have the right personnel in place, or the partners you have from a content perspective in place. Do you believe you've got the right technology today to deliver on that immersive experience? And then certainly from a kind of broader design strategy and in overarching thought, are those partnerships in place as well? Because I think to do it at scale, to do it with speed, certainly takes all of those components kind of in an interesting fashion.
Great.
Claudia, as we're waiting for Jessica, you want to give that another minute? Because I had one closing question maybe before we let you take us to close.
Yeah.
We have, I know we're out of time. Claudia, if you were to put your futurist hat on, for a little Nostradamus looking into the future, 1 to 2 years out, are there one or two key areas of focus that you believe are going to be the most critical challenges, things that you're looking at for V2 of Connect, if you will, or for others to be thinking about that you've already put on your radar, thinking about heading into 2021?
Well, we need to continue surprising our leadership team. So we will need to find new ways to have those connections and creating and delivering these programs digitally, and still have the experiences that will make them, well, have those connections and deep connections with organizations, with the new concepts, etc. So we're gonna continue exploring. We will continue leveraging our leadership principles, and making sure that everything that we do is well, of course, supporting our strategy and making sure that we take our leadership to the next level. But I'm not really sure on what are the topics to develop, but I'm sure that this new hybrid environment will give us a clue on some of the things that we will have to develop. But we're already working on that, so we're in exploration mode.
No, I love it. The surprise and delight, focus on the core model, and don't forget the organizational tenets. I think you're spot on with that approach. So Jessica, maybe I'll turn it back to you to publish and take us to close, as I think we're nearly at the hour.
Just share the results here with everyone. So I believe you can see the results of the poll on your screen now. And yeah, I mean, Todd, what do you think about this? Do you think this is in line with what you were thinking?
Yeah, it's interesting. In some ways, I thought there'd be maybe a bigger challenge on the personnel front, but I think folks have obviously done some intelligent hires for the folks that responded to that and feel like, or that they can equip those folks in the right spot. I think it is very intriguing to see maybe the thought of, could I do this with SharePoint, Teams, and Zoom? People are scratching their heads mightily. So I think that's a really interesting takeaway for folks.
Yeah, I agree. I'll just stop sharing this and then I will close out. So everyone, thank you so much for joining today. I honestly just loved seeing the chat go off based on what Claudia was saying. And Claudia, thank you again for being here. I really hope that everyone found this presentation helpful. I know there were a couple of questions throughout about whether or not you can access some of the research from Brandon Hall. So we do have a free ebook that includes the research that Todd shared and a little bit more that we created in partnership with Brandon Hall, as well as in partnership with Claudia here. So if you want to just take your phone, you can actually scan this QR code to pull that up and you can get your download there. It's also going to be at our booth. So if you want to just visit our virtual booth, you can also grab it there. But again, thank you everyone for just being here with us today. We had a really great time and I really hope that you all enjoy the rest of the conference today. So thank you again.
Hey, girl.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Claudia.
much. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, everyone.